So good evening, and I guess thank you for coming, and hopefully you'll be able to learn and come away a little bit wiser than when you came. I would like to say it's a pleasure for me to be here, but that would be a lie, because I don't think it's a pleasure for any of us to be here, because we find ourselves on this journey that no one wanted it to be on, but this is our reality. So I hope by sharing our story this evening, you realize again that you're not alone on this very difficult journey. So I would just like to share with you, our family story, which is just one family story with dementia. This is my husband and me, and this was taken on one of our last family trips to New York City in February of 2012. My husband was quite the jet aircraft nerd and loved to see jet aircraft wherever they were, so he quite enjoyed this trip. So every journey has a beginning and an end. And beginning with dementia is kind of hard to determine. For me, I chose to say the beginning was when we received the diagnosis. And it's etched in my mind. I don't think I will ever forget that day in December in 2010 when the doctor looked at us and said, yes, your husband has dementia. It was probably the worst day of my life, and it was the beginning of a journey that I had no clue what it was going to hold for us. The journey was not easy, and I'm sure those of you that are on the journey know that, so I'm not telling you anything new. That journey came to an end on June 2nd of this year. So it's reasonably fresh, so if I take a little pause and shed a little tear, just bear with me, okay? And it's not just my journey, and it's not just my husband's journey. It's our journey, because we are a family. The time that my husband was diagnosed, our daughters, Annie, in the dark hair, and Emily in the yellow shirt with a big smile, were only 9 and 14. They're now 16 and 21, so it's been very much their journey as well. And every time I have the opportunity to engage and share our story with people outside our family, I always make sure that they're okay with it. And they're 100%, 150% behind me tonight. I think my one daughter's going to be watching me, so hey. She's in Ottawa, so couldn't be here. So hey, Em, shout out. So what can you say? I would say that when I first started this journey with my husband, both of us being scientists, both of us being professors, what was really important to both of us is to be able to understand what this disease was about. How do we know? What do we know? What is this journey going to look like? How can we get prepared for what's ahead? You can't really, to some extent, because everybody's journey is very different. I mean, you know one person with Alzheimer's, you know one person with Alzheimer's. It manifests itself very differently for everybody, but there's some commonalities. So our first reaching out was to the Alzheimer's Society London Middlesex, and we got very much engaged very early on with their learning series. My husband went to the learning series for people with dementia. I went to the learning series for people who were caring for individuals with dementia. As the disease progressed, the learning series progressed as well, so that you could learn about, next steps of care, how to make decisions about, what type of care is best. And the one that I avoided, until finally I realized I couldn't avoid it anymore, was care in the later stages. Nancy would always send me a little email saying, hey, we're offering this, do you think you might be interested? And I'd always write back, say, thanks, but I don't think I'm ready there. I don't think I'm there yet. But then I realized by the time I get there, it's going to be too late, that I need to be able to know ahead of time, before I'm staring it in the face, what the end of life is about and how I can prepare myself, my children, and my husband for end-of-life care. I don't know what your situations are. In my situation, my husband was diagnosed in 2010. He moved into long-term care in the summer of 2013. So he met his end of life in long-term care, and a very compassionate team was with him. One of the things I learned in long-term care is you have annual meetings with the care team. And every time you have those annual meetings, and you can have them more frequently depending upon your need, is you're faced with this question. What will the end of life look like? What kind of measures do you want taken? Do you want heroic measures taken? Do you want resuscitation? What should happen if your husband should fall and break his hip? What do you want us to do? Those are daunting questions, because you think, well, of course I want his hip fixed. Of course I want this. But then you realize, whose best interest is that really? Is it in my best interest? Is it in his best interest? So those are the kinds of questions you need to think about. And believe me, they're terrifying. Absolutely scary, because no one wants to think about those kinds of questions. So I would guess that if there's one lesson I would suggest that you think about, my take-home message is be prepared, not scared. Because Alzheimer's dementia is a one-way street. There is no going back. Unpredictability is how long that journey will take. Those folks, the specialists, will tell you that on average, 7 to 10 years from diagnosis is the time from you might die. Some people go more quickly, others have a longer journey, so it's hard to know. But we do know that it will end, and we just don't know when. But we do know, and we can learn what the signs are, so we will know when are we getting close to the end. In my husband's case, if you don't mind me being very blunt about what happened, is he died in June. Somewhere around March, he had some difficulty eating. So he went from minced food to baby food, like the mushy stuff. And I don't think it was particularly enjoyable for him. It actually didn't taste too bad. It just didn't look so good, but it didn't taste too bad. And then from there, somewhere around April, he went into difficulty swallowing. So he would get the pocketing of the food. And it was very difficult for him to swallow. If he did swallow, then he would cough and choke. And that can lead to aspiration pneumonia, which is often a cause of death for folks with dementia, the trouble swallowing. And it was somewhere in late April, early May that it became very, very clear that he was near the end of his life. Because he was no longer able to eat. Any food he did have in his mouth or any food he did take was comfort food only. It wasn't nutritional. He didn't take enough in. He had difficulty swallowing, so there was not a lot of water that he took. So basically, in the end, he just shut down from dehydration and poor nutrition, basically. I guess you could say he starved and died of thirst, perhaps. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but that's essentially what happened. I guess if there's a blessing in there, as he shuts down, he shuts down. His awareness, which wasn't great anyway, disappeared. I found that hard in many ways, even though I was prepared intellectually as to what was happening. Emotionally, I don't think I was really prepared, because I don't know if you've had the opportunity, I don't know if that's the right word, to watch someone die, but it's not easy. To me, it looks like dying's hard work. There's that struggle, I think, that innate will to keep living and to keep moving on. Of course, breathing is hard. And then, of course, a lot of breathing is through the mouth, so your mouth dries out, but then you can't give too much water because you don't want them choking. So it's a whole mix of things. There's a series of medications that can be given to help ease that transition into death, and that's something that I learned about. So when I was able to speak to the care team, I spoke from a point of knowledge, and that really helped a lot. So how can you get prepared? Well, one of the things, you're here, so that's good. So clearly you are engaged in learning, and take advantage of every opportunity you have to learn about the disease well before you're going to need it. If I went to the essentials of the end-of-life care in May, it would not have helped me because I was already facing the end of life. So I took it well enough in advance that it gave me the opportunity to think about it, and importantly, it gave me the opportunity to ask questions because I knew what kind of questions I needed to ask. Lots of questions. And who did I ask these questions to? I asked them to the doctor who was in charge of my husband's care. I asked them to the folks who looked after him day in and day out at the long-term care home. I talked to our family, our daughters, about what did they see, what did they want, what did they expect for end of life? How comfortable would they be with the decisions that I had to make? They were not easy conversations, and trust me, there were tons of tears. But we had those conversations. And I had conversations with the social workers here at the Alzheimer's Society who helped me frame my decisions in a way that was consistent with my beliefs and Gord's beliefs. Fortunately, before Gord was diagnosed, he and I were very open and discussed, quite frankly, our end-of-life wishes. And I knew that he didn't want to be plugged into anything, and I knew that he didn't want to be fed by a tube. So those decisions were easy for me because I knew that's not what he wanted. So we were fortunate we had those conversations. So if you haven't had those conversations, it's probably a good conversation to have. Not easy, but you need to have them. And you got to be prepared. No one wants to be prepared for end of life, but the greatest risk of dying is living, right? So we're all going to face it at some point in time. When you're faced with someone with dementia, it's doubly hard because, as Nancy I think will talk a bit about later, every day you lose a little bit more of that individual. Every day you find yourself grieving and you think, oh my God, is this ever going to end? And part of you, and I'm going to be brutally honest with you, when it did end, I felt this great sigh of relief that finally his journey had ended. And selfishly, and maybe not, my journey had ended. So now I could sort of grieve and move on. Because when you're stuck in that dementia journey, it's the never-ending grief, and it's really hard to move on with your own life. So you need to discuss the options. You need to discuss with yourself, have that conversation with yourself, with all your family members who will be engaged. If you're caring for a parent, then you need to talk to your siblings if they're out there, you know. If you're caring for your husband or your wife and you have children, engage them in those discussions, or their siblings. Engage professionals in those discussions. That's where the social workers here have tremendous strength and tremendous abilities to help you focus it on what's important. And discuss openly and honestly with the doctor who is caring for your loved one what the options are. What kind of decisions do you have the authority to make? Who makes decisions, for example, about when to give medications? Morphine is often a drug that's used at end of life to help ease the transition. When is that decision made to give morphine? How do you know? In my husband's case, it was given around 10 o'clock at night and he died 3 the next morning, even though he was dying for a number of days. The question was always put to me, do you think he's suffering? Do you think he's in pain? To me, I didn't know. I hoped he wasn't, but maybe he was, but I didn't know. And it's a tough decision to make. So you need to understand what options are there for easing and making sure it's a comfortable, good death. So I hope that you're able to learn a bit and take it away. And like I say, it's not easy to make these kinds of decisions. Let's see, do I have another one? So if nothing else, be prepared and don't be scared. Thank you.